We rebuilt the military during my first term, and we have great things happening with our military. We also essentially approved a budget which is in the facility, you'll like to hear this, of $1 trillion, $1 trillion. And nobody's seen anything like it. The military is very, very powerful, and it's going to remain that way.
We spent $1 trillion on servicing US debt last year. And according to Donald Trump, we are poised to spend now $1 trillion on the Pentagon, when we heard all sorts of promises, Cenk, from the Trump administration about how they wanted to cut spending, including over at the Pentagon.
Yeah, we're about to give you direct quotes from Elon Musk and Donald Trump Jr. on that. But lo and behold, it turns out they're not going to cut the Pentagon. They're going to add to it spectacularly, which is exactly why we challenged them in the first place. Are you actually going to cut real waste, fraud, and abuse? Or are you going to do the same exact thing that establishment Republicans and establishment Democrats do? Add more pork and more pork to defense? Well, our answer is in.
So, here's more from Trump's Oval Office meeting yesterday. This was the press conference that he held with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In the middle of that press conference, he addressed the Pentagon. Let's take a look.
We have to build our military, and we're very cost conscious, but the military is something that we have to build, and we have to be strong because you got a lot of bad forces out there now. So we're going to be approving a budget, and I'm proud to say, actually, the biggest one we've ever done for the military. We're cutting other things that were under DOGE, but under a lot of other. When you look at a woman getting $2 billion for environmental, and it had nothing to do with environmental, and they had $100 in the bank, and they give her $2 billion. Many of those cases, all that stuff is going to be cut out. But we are getting a very, very powerful military. We have things under order now, the likes of which we've never had before. We've never had the kind of aircraft, the kind of missiles, anything that we have ordered.
And of course, it's not lost on me that Trump is sitting next to Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been egging the US to go to war with Iran on behalf of Israel, as Trump is mentioning increased spending for the Pentagon, which we'll talk a little bit about Iran later in the show. But Pete Hegseth was very happy about this, of course. He's celebrating it. He's the head of the Department of Defense, and he says, "Thank you, Mr. President. Coming soon, the first $1 trillion Department of Defense budget. President Trump is rebuilding our military, and fast. P.S. We intend to spend every taxpayer dollar wisely on lethality and readiness." By the way, I seriously doubt that. The Pentagon has failed every single audit that has been done. They can't pass a single audit because there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse at the Pentagon. But fascinatingly enough, there hasn't been much attention on that waste, fraud, and abuse when it comes to cutting spending. And look, we're not gonna cut spending, we're gonna add spending when it comes to the Pentagon. So, Cenk, take it away.
Yeah, so we're asking in the live chat poll, how many Trump voters do you think want to cut the military budget? None, some, most, or all, okay? I would definitely not go with all, and I would definitely not go with none, but I know that some will. But let me give you some facts on this. So if you remember, I did this tweet right in the beginning of the administration. I said, actually not even then, but after the election, before they came in. Hey, Elon Musk, I said, put me in charge of the Pentagon. I'll slash $400 billion easy. That'll get you 20% of your goal of $2 trillion right out of the gate. I went to Wharton 3 years before you. I own a media company, so I know how to run a business. If you really want to cut, put me in, coach. Now, I did that because I wanted to see what the reaction was, both from, mainly from the right-wing commenters, right? To be honest, I didn't think Elon was going to reply. When somebody told me that Elon replied, I didn't even quite believe it. And so I went, and it turns out he did reply, and several times. Let me show you one of them. And he said, dramatic changes for the better are coming, on another tweet. And he said, if massive change is not made, America's security is in danger. So he agrees that we should be cutting. And then not only that, let's go to graphic 5 now. Then Donald Trump Jr. Jumped in and said, and oh, by the way, earlier Elon had asked for suggestions on how to cut on my tweet. Okay, so they're definitely At that point, they're saying we're cutting, no question, we're cutting the Pentagon. Then Donald Trump Jr. says, I'm for all of this. So is pretty much everyone I know on the right. If the left doesn't believe me, there's probably countless tweets, interviews, and my Triggered podcast to refer to. This seems more like a universal to most Americans I've spoken to. This is about cutting the Pentagon, okay? And then he adds one more, he says, only contention I know would come from the establishment on both sides. Permanent Washington likely does not like a lot of this.
You heard it here first, folks. Don Jr. says that his father is part of the establishment.
But by the way, guys, that's part of why you have a conversation with the right wing. That's why you talk to them and say, okay, what do you think? What are you going to do? And then they went on the record and they said, yeah, we're definitely gonna cut the Pentagon. And then here comes Trump and says, yeah, I'm just kidding. Of course I'm not gonna cut the Pentagon. I'm gonna add $150 billion to it. But this is why I told you guys all throughout leading up to the election and afterwards that Donald Trump is a fake populist. Now, there are important parts of that. He was smart enough to at least pretend to be a populist while the Democrats kept punching themselves in the face about all the corporate CEOs are on our side, woohoo! Well, nothing will fundamentally change, we love the status quo. I'm like, stop, you're gonna lose the elections, right? But does Donald Trump mean any of the things that he says in terms of sticking it to the billionaires and deliver for the average guy? His cabinet has more billionaires than any cabinet in history. Did he actually reduce the debt last time he was in charge? No, he added to it more than any American president in history, $8 trillion, $5 trillion of which came before COVID. It was record-breaking, debt and deficit creation. Why? Giant tax cuts for corporations, the wealthy, etc.
And then there was COVID, of course.
And then COVID added another $3 trillion on top of the 5 he'd already created.
Yep.
Okay, so that was it. So this time around, he's going around saying, "Oh, I'm going to cut taxes for tips and Social Security." There's this hilarious rumor that some poor folks in MAGA have believed that he's going to eliminate income tax for everyone under $150,000. There's no chance. Quote me from here to eternity. There's no chance that's gonna happen. No, what's going to happen instead is a tiny amount of cuts for the middle class, just as window dressing, right? And then massive cuts for the wealthy and take corporate taxes from 21 to 15%. So, but hey, $5.5 trillion in tax cuts. But don't worry, DOGE is cutting. Oh my God, and the tariffs and the gold card and stuff. But DOGE is on top of this. If you take them at their word, at what they published publicly, they cut $130 billion. Now, there's a lot of people that have shown that that's not really true and it's a lot less than that. But 130 billion compared to 5.5 trillion in tax cuts is literally nothing. And they said, no, it's okay, because we're gonna cut the Pentagon. The Pentagon has a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. And don't worry, Don Jr. said everyone he knows in the right wing agrees we should cut the Pentagon.
And by the way, it wasn't
just. And now, where are the savings? The 130 billion that DOGE cut, they're gonna add that every single year plus 20 billion to the Pentagon. So they've done no net cuts at all. They've added spending and they're gonna do massive tax cuts.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, I was one of those folks who would roll my eyes at Republicans, like the fiscal conservatives that would they kept talking about the debt. And the reason why I rolled my eyes at them is because they would only talk about the debt when Democrats were in charge and when Democrats were proposing policies that would require some spending. And then they would come in when they're in charge, they add to the deficit and the debt. And so that's why I would roll my eyes. But look, for those who are actually interested in the truth and a genuine concern with what's happening economically speaking in this country, it is definitely true that our debt has become a huge problem. When we're spending $1 trillion a year now servicing our debt, that's a problem. So when you hear some of the actual legitimate fiscal conservatives, the economists who are raising alarm over our massive debt, they're right? At some point, servicing that debt is going to become unmanageable. And no, I don't believe in modern monetary theory. I just don't. I don't think that the argument is good at all. And I think what we're doing right now is going to lead to a lot of pain and suffering for future generations in this country.
Yeah, one last thing here. So some folks either purposely or accidentally misinterpreted what I did with Elon as thinking that, oh, I trust Elon. And if I ask him to cut the Pentagon, I bet he'll do it because he likes me. No, of course not, of course not. But what happened? You asked them, and by the way, if you're in the right wing, it's also not a trick. Do you want to cut defense or don't you want to cut defense? I'm genuinely curious. My guess was that some of their voters wanted to cut defense, but that their leaders would never do it. So now, not only are Elon and Don Jr., et cetera, even Hegseth pretending to cut defense for a second, but he's a neocon, he was never gonna do it, right? So all those guys are on the record, but so are a lot of the right-wing hosts on shows I went on and had these conversations on. So let's watch that as well.
Pentagon racks up $35 trillion in accounting changes in 1 year, and they cannot account for 63% of $4 trillion of assets. DOD regularly buys parts and equipment it does not need because it can't keep track of parts and equipment it already owns. They're not even keeping track of it. So they keep buying stuff, they don't even know what they have in their inventory. Think about how crazy that is. Again, you and I are paying for it. The Pentagon has failed. Pentagon started doing audits 7 years ago. They have never once passed one.
Will the Defense Department budget be cut? It's $850 billion, and we know there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse inside the Pentagon spending craziness.
Yeah, because we hadn't had a decent audit of any of the money spent in years and years and years. We have to start in the Pentagon. We need to make a trigon, 3 sides instead of 5 sides in the Pentagon. It is way too big. We have to cut back.
The Pentagon never passes an audit. They say, oh, we can't find $400 billion. Well, then then I'm gonna cut your budget by $400 billion because apparently you can't find it. I'm not gonna give you money. That was Tim Pool saying absolutely. That was Patrick Bet-David after I went on his show and talked about cutting the Pentagon. Laura Ingram's segment, she did a bunch of them. One of them was on the night that I was on Tim Pool's show. This became a real thing in the right, and they really believed. They really believed that they were going to cut the Pentagon. They believed that they were actually cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. By the way, that's another reason why not to hate Trump voters. So I know it's super frustrating as you see, like, oh, guys, of course they're not going to cut the Pentagon, but they really think they are. But think about it, guys. They genuinely believe that. So today, they're genuinely disappointed. And yes, for the 18th time, not all of them. Some of them will defend anything that Trump does. And let's be honest, some of us will defend anything that a Democratic leader does. No, Joe Biden is young, Kamala Harris was flawless, right? So, but here we are, we now have right wing, left wing in the middle going, why on God's green earth are you going to add to the Pentagon and make it $1 trillion budget when they never pass an audit, they can't account for $400 billion at a time. And this is bankrupting us, all for waste, fraud, and abuse.
And look, this is gonna continue as long as Americans view politics as a tribal blood sport where you defend your side regardless of what they do. It's really important to hold your own side accountable when they break promises. 100%. So if you have super strict standards for voters on your side, they have to follow everything perfectly, or else, if they're not perfect adherents to the cult, you're gonna turn on them. You should have the same, culture in regard to the politicians who actually have the power to pass the policy. So if they make promises on the campaign trail and they turn around and do a 180, hold them accountable. Otherwise, this is never gonna change. We're gonna keep having the same situation play out over and over again.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.